Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you'd bet your entire life on their honesty, only to discover that everything you believed was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? I'm not talking about small lies or harmless white lies that we all tell from time to time. I'm talking about the kind of betrayal that shakes the very foundation of who you are, that makes you question every memory, every conversation, every tender moment you thought was real. My name doesn't matter, but my story does, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. It could be happening to you right now, and you might not even know it. For 8 years I thought I had the perfect marriage. 8 years of waking up next to someone I loved, someone I trusted with every fiber of my being. 8 years of building a life together, making plans, dreaming dreams, creating a future that seemed so bright, I sometimes had to squint just to look at it. But here's what I've learned. The brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows, and sometimes the person sleeping next to you is a complete stranger wearing a familiar face. This is the story of how my wife's so-called harmless fun turned into a nightmare that nearly destroyed me, and how I fought back in a way she never saw coming. This is the story of how I recorded everything, gathered evidence with the patience of a detective and the broken heart of a betrayed husband, and how her laughter died in her throat the moment I filed that claim. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I was blissfully ignorant, wrapped in the warm cocoon of what I thought was genuine love. It started on a Tuesday. Isn't it strange how the most life-changing moments often happen on the most ordinary days? Not on birthdays or anniversaries or holidays, but on random Tuesdays when you're just trying to get through another week. I remember that morning with painful clarity. The sun was streaming through our bedroom window, hitting the dust particles in the air and making them dance like tiny diamonds. Sarah was already up, which wasn't unusual. She'd always been an early riser, someone who greeted each day with an enthusiasm I found both admirable and slightly exhausting. I could hear her in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of her morning routine, the coffee maker gurgling, cabinets opening and closing, her humming some tune I didn't recognize. Everything seemed so normal, so perfectly, beautifully normal. I had no idea that normal was about to become a luxury I could no longer afford. I rolled out of bed, stretched, felt my spine crack in that satisfying way it does first thing in the morning. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror as I headed to the bathroom. 35 years old, starting to show a few gray hairs at the temples, a few more lines around the eyes than I remembered having last year. But overall I looked like a happy man, a content man, a man who thought he had everything figured out. God, was I naive. I splashed water on my face, brushed my teeth, went through all the mundane rituals that structure our lives without us even thinking about them. When I walked into the kitchen, Sarah was already dressed for work, looking stunning as always in her navy blue blazer and white blouse. She had this way of putting herself together that made everything look effortless, like she'd just rolled out of bed looking like a magazine cover. She smiled when she saw me. That smile I'd fallen in love with 9 years ago when we met at a mutual friend's barbecue. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, her whole face lit up, and for a moment, everything felt right with the world. She poured me a cup of coffee without asking, remembered that I took it with just a splash of milk, no sugar. These little gestures of intimacy, of knowing someone so well that their preferences become your automatic responses, this is what I thought marriage was all about. We talked about nothing important that morning. She mentioned a meeting she had with a new client, someone named Marcus, who was looking to redesign his company's entire marketing strategy. I remember thinking it was great that she was getting such high-profile clients. Sarah worked in marketing and public relations, and she'd been climbing the corporate ladder steadily for the past few years. I was proud of her ambition, her drive, her refusal to settle for mediocrity. I worked in software development, a job that paid well but didn't exactly set my soul on fire. We were a good team, I thought. She brought the excitement, the social connections, the ability to light up a room just by walking into it. I brought stability, financial security, the steady presence that she said grounded her. We balanced each other out. Or at least, that's what I told myself every single day. I kissed her goodbye that morning, tasted her cherry lip gloss, felt her hand briefly touch my chest in that absent-minded way people do when they've been together long enough that affection becomes muscle memory. She told me she loved me. I told her I loved her too, and I meant it with every atom of my being. She grabbed her bag, her keys, and walked out the door. I stood there in our kitchen in the home we'd bought together 3 years ago, surrounded by the life we'd built, and I felt grateful. I felt blessed. I felt like the luckiest man alive. If only I had known what was really happening. If only I had paid more attention to the small details that were already there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for me to notice them. But hindsight is a cruel teacher. It shows you all the answers only after the test is over, only after you've already failed in ways you didn't even know were possible. That day, that perfectly ordinary Tuesday, was the last day of my old life. Everything that came after would be colored by what I was about to discover, tainted by the knowledge that would slowly, painfully, devastatingly reveal itself over the coming weeks and months. Sarah and I had met at what I can only describe as a perfect moment in both our lives. I was 26, fresh out of a relationship that had ended badly, trying to rebuild my confidence and figure out what I actually wanted from life, instead of just drifting along. She was 25, vibrant and full of plans, the kind of person who made you feel like anything was possible just by being in her orbit. Our mutual friend Josh had thrown this elaborate backyard barbecue, one of those summer gatherings that seem to exist outside of normal time, where the afternoon bleeds into evening and evening into night without anyone really noticing or caring. I was standing by the grill, probably looking awkward and out of place like I always did at social events, when she approached me. She made the first move, started the conversation, asked me what I did for a living with genuine interest that didn't feel forced or polite. We talked for hours that day. We talked about everything and nothing, about our dreams and fears, about the books we loved and the movies we hated, about our families and our childhoods and the people we hoped to become. By the time the party ended, I knew I wanted to see her again. By the time our third date rolled around, I knew I was falling in love. By the time we'd been together for a year, I couldn't imagine my life without her. She had this energy, this infectious enthusiasm for life that pulled me out of my shell. Before Sarah, I was content to spend my weekends at home, reading or coding or watching documentaries about topics nobody else cared about. After Sarah, I found myself at art galleries and concerts, at impromptu road trips and spontaneous dance classes, doing things I never would have considered before. She expanded my world and I loved her for it. Our wedding was small but beautiful, just close family and friends in a garden venue that Sarah had fallen in love with the moment she saw it. She cried happy tears when I said my vows, promised to love her through everything life might throw at us. I meant every word. I meant it when I promised to be her partner, her support, her safe harbor in any storm. I meant it when I vowed to honor and cherish her for as long as we both lived. And I thought she meant it too when she made the same promises back to me. The early years of our marriage were good, really good. We had our arguments like any couple, disagreements about money or whose family to visit for the holidays or whether we should get a dog. But we always worked through them. We always found our way back to each other. We laughed more than we fought. We made love with passion and tenderness. We built a life that seemed solid and real and permanent. I thought I knew her. I thought I understood who she was at her core, what drove her, what made her happy, what kept her up at night. I thought we had the kind of transparency that comes from true intimacy, the kind where you can read each other's moods and needs without words. I was so confident in my knowledge of her that I didn't see the changes when they started happening. Or maybe I saw them, but explained them away, rationalized them, fit them into a narrative that made sense to me because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. This is what we do, isn't it? We protect ourselves from truths we're not ready to face by constructing elaborate justifications for the inexplicable. We tell ourselves comfortable lies because the uncomfortable truth might shatter everything we've built our lives upon. I became an expert at these justifications, a master of self-deception, and it nearly cost me everything. The first real sign that something was changing came about 2 years into our marriage, though I didn't recognize it as a sign at the time. Sarah started going out more with her coworkers, which seemed completely reasonable. She was building her career, networking was important in her field, and I understood that professional relationships often required social time outside the office. She'd come home late from these outings, sometimes a little tipsy, always with stories about her colleagues and their lives. I'd listen, laugh at the funny anecdotes, ask questions about the people she mentioned. I was being supportive, I thought. I was being the kind of husband who didn't get jealous or controlling, who trusted his wife to have her own life and friendships. But looking back now, I can see the pattern I was too blind to recognize then. The outings became more frequent. What started as once or twice a month became weekly, then twice weekly. Her phone became something she guarded more carefully, taking it with her even when she went to the bathroom, keeping it face down on the table during dinner. When I'd ask about her day, her answers became vaguer, less detailed. She'd mention people's names without giving me context about who they were or how they fit into her work life. And she started laughing at things on her phone that she wouldn't share with me. I'd see her face light up with amusement as she scrolled through messages, but when I'd ask what was funny, she'd say it was just some inside joke from work. Nothing interesting, nothing I'd find amusing. Have you ever felt your stomach drop for no reason you can articulate? That sudden sensation that something is wrong even though you can't point to any specific evidence? I started having that feeling more and more often, but I pushed it down. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was turning into one of those insecure husbands who see threats where none exist. I reminded myself that Sarah loved me, that she'd chosen me, that we had vows and a home and a life together. Surely that counted for something. Surely that meant she wouldn't betray me. Then came the business trips. Sarah's job had always involved some travel, but it had been relatively infrequent. Now, suddenly, she seemed to be going somewhere every other week. Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, San Francisco. She'd be gone for 2 or 3 days at a time, staying in nice hotels, eating at restaurants I'd never heard of, living a life that didn't include me. She'd call me each evening, tell me about her meetings, say she missed me, and I'd believe her, because what choice did I have? Suspecting your wife of infidelity without proof is like accusing someone of a crime with no evidence. It makes you the villain, the paranoid one, the untrusting spouse who's probably the real problem in the relationship. So I swallowed my doubts. I ignored the little voice in my head that kept asking why her business trips always seemed to fall on weekends, or why she'd stopped inviting me to join her company events the way she used to. I played the role of the understanding husband, the secure partner who didn't need constant reassurance or attention, and all the while something was eating away at me from the inside, a growing sense of wrongness that I couldn't name or address. Our physical relationship changed too, though it happened so gradually that I didn't notice at first. Sarah had always been affectionate, someone who liked to cuddle on the couch while we watched movies, who'd reach for my hand when we walked down the street, who'd initiate intimacy with a frequency that made me feel desired and valued. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she pulled away. The casual touches became less frequent. The passionate kisses turned into quick pecks goodbye. Our lovemaking, which had always felt connected and meaningful, became mechanical when it happened at all. She started having more headaches, being more tired, finding more reasons why tonight wasn't a good night. And when we did make love, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely, like she was going through the motions with me while thinking about someone or something else. I tried to talk to her about it once. I remember choosing my words so carefully, trying to express my feelings without sounding accusatory or needy. I told her I felt like we were drifting apart, like we weren't connecting the way we used to. She looked at me with what seemed like genuine confusion and concern. She said she'd been stressed with work, that she was sorry if she'd been distant, that it had nothing to do with me or us. She promised to make more effort, to prioritize our relationship. And for a week or two, things did improve. She was more present, more engaged, more like the Sarah I'd married. We had date nights again, stayed up late talking like we used to, made love with something approaching the passion we'd once had. I thought we'd turned a corner. I thought my fears had been unfounded, that we'd just hit a rough patch like every marriage does at some point. But then it all slipped back. The distance returned, the late nights, the guarded phone, the vague explanations. Only now it was worse because I'd seen proof that she could be different if she chose to, which meant she was actively choosing not to be. This thought haunted me. If our problems were just about stress or time management, they'd be consistent. But the fact that she could turn it on and off like a switch suggested something more deliberate, more conscious. It suggested that when she was distant, it was because she wanted to be, because her attention and affection were directed elsewhere. I started watching her more carefully, paying attention to patterns I'd previously ignored. I noticed that she always tilted her phone away from me when texting. I noticed that she'd started taking calls in other rooms, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't quite make out. I noticed that she'd bought new lingerie, beautiful expensive pieces that I never saw her wear, at least not for me. I noticed that she came home from some of her work events smelling different, wearing perfume I hadn't smelled before, or cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Each observation was small enough to explain away individually, but together they formed a picture I didn't want to see. The human mind is incredibly skilled at denial. We can look directly at evidence and convince ourselves we're seeing something else entirely. We can live in alternate realities of our own construction, because facing the truth is too painful, too destructive, too final. I lived in that denial for months, maybe even longer. I'd catch myself having dark thoughts about what Sarah might be doing, who she might be with, and then I'd immediately counter those thoughts with rationalizations. Maybe she's just going through something personal and doesn't know how to talk to me about it. Maybe I'm the one with the problem, being too sensitive, too demanding, too insecure. Maybe this is just what happens in long-term relationships, and I need to accept it and stop looking for problems where none exist. But there was one thought I couldn't shake, one question that kept circling back no matter how many times I tried to dismiss it. If everything was really fine, why did I feel this constant anxiety? Why did my heart race every time she picked up her phone? Why did I feel relieved when she came home instead of excited to see her? Why had love started to feel like fear? I began having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake next to Sarah, listening to her breathing, wondering what she was dreaming about and whether I was in those dreams at all. I'd watch her sleep sometimes, studying her face for clues to who she really was. This woman I'd promised my life to, but increasingly felt I didn't know at all. She looked peaceful in sleep, innocent, like the girl I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But people can be anyone in their sleep. It's when they're awake that their true selves emerge, and the awake Sarah was becoming more of a stranger every day. Then came the day that changed everything. The day I could no longer deny what was happening. The day my willful blindness finally shattered into sharp-cutting pieces of reality. It was a Saturday morning about 6 months ago now, though it feels like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Sarah had told me she had to go into the office for a few hours to prepare for a Monday presentation. This wasn't unusual. She often worked weekends when big projects were looming. She got dressed in business casual clothes, gathered her laptop and files, kissed me on the cheek, and said she'd be back by early afternoon. I told her I'd probably go to the gym and then maybe catch up on some personal coding projects I'd been neglecting. She said that sounded great, told me to have a good morning, and left. I heard her car pull out of the driveway, listened to the engine noise fade into the distance, and then I sat there in our living room, surrounded by all the trappings of our shared life, and I felt that sick feeling in my stomach again. That knowing without knowing. That certainty that something was very wrong even though I couldn't prove it. Have you ever acted on pure instinct? Done something that your rational mind told you was crazy but your gut insisted was necessary? I grabbed my keys and followed her. I don't know what possessed me to do it. I'd never followed anyone before, never spied on my wife or anyone else. I wasn't that kind of person. At least I didn't think I was. But in that moment, something stronger than my sense of who I thought I was took over. Some survival instinct that recognized a threat my conscious mind was still trying to deny. I stayed a few cars back, feeling ridiculous and paranoid and also strangely calm, like I'd finally stopped fighting against the current and was just letting it carry me wherever it needed to go. Sarah didn't drive to her office. She drove in the opposite direction, toward the nicer part of town where the expensive high-rise apartments gleamed in the morning sun. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips on the steering wheel, in my chest that felt like it might crack open from the pressure building inside it. She pulled into the parking garage of one of those buildings, the kind with a doorman and marble lobbies and rent that costs more per month than most people's mortgages. I parked on the street where I could see the entrance, and I waited. I waited for 20 minutes, 30, 45, my mind racing through every possible explanation that didn't involve what I knew in my bones was happening. Maybe she was meeting a client who lived here. Maybe it was a work thing after all, just in an unconventional location. Maybe. And then I saw her. She came out of the building with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, good-looking in that generic way that women's magazines define as attractive, wearing expensive casual clothes that screamed money and success, and he had his arm around her waist. She was laughing at something he said, leaning into him in a way that was unmistakably intimate, familiar, comfortable. They walked to a coffee shop on the corner, sat at an outside table, and proceeded to have what looked like a completely normal, utterly domestic breakfast together. Like a couple. Like two people who did this all the time. Like she wasn't married to someone else, to me, to the man who was sitting in his car watching his entire world collapse in real time. I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't get air into my lungs for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Everything looked strange and distant, like I was watching this scene through a thick pane of glass or from underwater. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my wife, my Sarah, the woman who'd promised to forsake all others. But it was. It absolutely was. And as I sat there, frozen and shaking and feeling like I might throw up or pass out or both, I realized that some part of me had known all along. Some part of me had been screaming the truth that the rest of me refused to hear. I don't remember driving home. I have no memory of the route I took or how long it took me to get there. I was on autopilot, my body performing the mechanical tasks of driving while my mind tried to process what I'd just witnessed. When I pulled into our driveway, I just sat there in my car for I don't know how long, staring at our house, at the home we'd made together and wondering how many times she'd done this, how long it had been going on, whether she'd ever really loved me, or if our entire marriage had been a lie from the beginning. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I confronted her, before I made any decisions about what to do next. Because if I confronted her based only on what I'd seen that morning, she'd have room to lie, to minimize, to convince me that it wasn't what it looked like or that it was a one-time mistake or any number of other stories people tell when they're caught doing something unforgivable. No, I needed evidence. Real, undeniable, documented evidence. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to record everything. I was going to become a detective in my own marriage, gathering proof of my wife's betrayal with the same methodical care I brought to my coding projects. It felt cold and calculated even as I thought it, but what choice did I have? She'd already chosen deception. I was just choosing to see it clearly. I went inside and started making plans. I researched surveillance equipment, read forums about how to document infidelity, learned about laws regarding recording in my state. I discovered that I could legally record conversations I was part of, and that I could place cameras in common areas of my own home. I ordered a voice-activated recorder, small cameras disguised as everyday objects, software to recover deleted text messages. I felt sick doing it, sick at heart and soul, but I couldn't stop. The need to know, to really know the full truth, was stronger than my disgust at the invasion of privacy I was planning. Besides, I rationalized, how can you invade the privacy of someone who's already violated every promise they made to you? Don't I have a right to know what's being done to me, what's happening in my own marriage, in my own home? The equipment arrived over the next week, discreetly packaged, impersonal and cold, like everything else in my life had become. I set it all up while Sarah was at work, my hands steady even though my heart was breaking. A camera in the living room disguised as a smoke detector, another in the kitchen, hidden in a shelf clock, a voice-activated recorder in her car, tucked under the passenger seat where she'd never think to look, and I installed monitoring software on our home computer, the one she used sometimes for personal emails and social media. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like I was watching someone else do these things, make these choices. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to see the whole picture before I decided how to respond, what to do, whether to fight for this marriage or burn it to the ground. The waiting was torture. Every day I'd wake up next to Sarah, kiss her good morning, go through all the motions of being a loving husband, all while knowing that devices I'd planted were recording her every move in our home, every conversation, every moment of her secret life that she thought was hidden from me. I felt like I was living in two realities simultaneously. The surface reality where we were still a married couple going about our daily routines, and the hidden reality where I was systematically documenting her betrayal. The recordings started accumulating. Phone calls I wasn't supposed to hear, text messages she thought she'd deleted, conversations in our living room when she thought I wasn't home but I'd just parked down the street watching the cameras on my phone. And the picture that emerged was so much worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't a recent thing. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake that had spiraled out of control. She'd been having an affair for over a year and a half. A year and a half of lies, of looking me in the eye and telling me she loved me while she was building an entire secret relationship with another man. His name was Marcus. And yes, he was real. That client she'd mentioned months ago actually existed, but he wasn't just a professional contact. He was the man she was in love with, The man she spent her supposedly work-related trips with. The man whose apartment she visited on Saturday mornings while telling me she was at the office. I listened to their conversations and they gutted me. She talked to him the way she used to talk to me in the early days of our relationship, full of excitement and possibility, making plans for a future, saying things like how she couldn't wait until this was all sorted out and they could be together properly. Sorted out. That's how she referred to our marriage. To me. To the life we'd built over 8 years. Something that needed to be sorted out, like a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. She never used my name in these conversations. I was always just him or my husband, spoken with a mixture of guilt and annoyance, like I was this inconvenient complication in her real life, her authentic life, the one she was living with Marcus. One night, I listened to a recording of her on the phone with him and she was laughing. That beautiful laugh I'd fallen in love with, the one that used to be for me, was now for him. She was telling him about her day, about some funny thing that happened at work, and she sounded so happy, so free, so completely herself in a way she hadn't been with me in months or maybe years. And then Marcus asked her when she was going to tell me, when she was going to end things officially. There was a pause and I held my breath, even though this was a recording from 3 days ago, even though I already knew how this conversation ended because I'd lived through the aftermath. She sighed and she said soon, but not yet. She needed to make sure everything was in place first. She needed to talk to a lawyer, understand what divorce would mean financially, figure out the logistics. She didn't want to hurt me, she said, which almost made me laugh out loud there in my car, listening to my wife discuss plans to end our marriage with her lover. She didn't want to hurt me, but she'd been betraying me for 18 months. She didn't want to hurt me, but she was planning our divorce while still sleeping in our bed, eating meals I cooked, accepting my love and trust while giving her own to someone else. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. But here's what really broke me. Marcus asked her if she ever felt guilty, and she said of course she did all the time. But then she said something that I'll never forget, words that are burned into my brain like a brand. She said, "But when I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. He's a good man, he's been a good husband, but we've become more like roommates than lovers. With you, everything feels possible again. With you, I remember who I really am, who she really is. Apparently who she really is someone who can lie to her husband's face every single day while planning a future with another man. Who she really is someone who can take vows and then break them without enough conviction to even be honest about it. Who takes the coward's way out of maintaining the comfortable life I provide while building a new one on the side." I wanted to scream. I wanted to put my fist through something. I wanted to drive home right then and confront her with everything I knew. But I didn't, because I'd come too far to act on emotion now. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. Over the next several weeks, I gathered more evidence than I would ever need. I had recordings, photographs, text messages, emails, credit card statements, showing charges at romantic restaurants and hotels on days she'd told me she was working late or out with colleagues from work. I had videos of them together, captured both by my equipment and by my own surveillance when I'd follow her, document their meetings, their public displays of affection, their complete lack of concern that anyone who knew us might see them. They were brazenly open about their relationship everywhere except around me. I compiled it all into organized folders, backed everything up to multiple cloud services, created a timeline of the affair with supporting evidence for every entry. I was methodical about it, treating it like a project at work, because if I let myself feel the full weight of what I was uncovering, I would have fallen apart completely, and I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Not when I was so close to having everything I needed. I also started preparing in other ways. I consulted with 3 different divorce attorneys, explaining my situation, showing them the evidence I'd gathered. They all said the same thing. I had an airtight case for fault-based divorce. Sarah's infidelity was thoroughly documented, and in our state, that mattered for things like asset division and alimony. I wouldn't just be leaving the marriage, I'd be leaving it with favorable terms, with financial security, with proof that I wasn't the one who destroyed what we'd built. I started separating my finances subtly, moving money into accounts she didn't know about, protecting myself from the financial devastation that often accompanies divorce. I documented all our shared assets, had our house appraised, gathered all our important documents. I was building a fortress around myself, preparing for the war I knew was coming, even though she had no idea the battle lines were already drawn. And through all of this, I still had to live with her. Still had to wake up next to her every morning, sit across from her at breakfast, ask about her day, pretend I didn't know that every word out of her mouth about where she was going or what she was doing was likely a lie. It was the most surreal experience of my life, existing in this liminal space between ignorance and action, knowing the truth but not yet acting on it. Sometimes I'd look at her and feel such a complex swirl of emotions that I couldn't even name them all. Love and hate, grief and anger, betrayal and nostalgia for what we used to be, or what I thought we were. I mourned our marriage even as I was planning its funeral. I grieved for the Sarah I thought I knew, even as I documented the real Sarah's secret life. Have you ever had to pretend everything is fine when your whole world is crumbling? Have you ever had to smile and make small talk when you want to scream? It's exhausting in a way I can't fully describe. It takes every ounce of strength you have to maintain the facade, to not let the mask slip, to keep playing your role in this terrible performance when you know exactly how the final act is going to end. There were moments when I almost broke, times when she'd do something kind or tender, moments when I'd catch a glimpse of the woman I'd married, and I'd think maybe I should just confront her now, tell her what I know, give her a chance to explain or apologize or fight for us. But then I'd remember the recordings, the evidence of how deep the betrayal went, how calculated it all was, and my resolve would harden again. This wasn't a mistake, or a moment of weakness. This was a choice she made every single day for 18 months. A choice to deceive me, to betray me, to build a life with someone else while keeping me as her safety net, her backup plan, her comfortable fallback option. And I deserved better than that. I deserved someone who chose me every day, not someone who was just waiting for the right moment to leave. The turning point came about 3 months into my investigation. Sarah announced that she needed to go on another business trip, this time to Miami for 5 days. She gave me the dates, told me about the conference she was supposedly attending, showed me the itinerary her company had sent her. But I'd learned to verify everything by this point. I called her company's main office, pretending to be a vendor trying to confirm details about the Miami conference. There was no conference. Her company wasn't sending anyone to Miami that week. She'd lied, blatantly and easily, and I realized that this was probably the trip where she and Marcus were planning to take things to the next level. Maybe she was going to tell him she was ready to leave me. Maybe they were going to use those 5 days to plan their future together. Or maybe they were just going to pretend they were a normal couple without the complication of me lurking in the background. Whatever the reason, I knew this trip was significant, and I decided it was time to make my move. I wasn't going to wait for her to come back from Miami and tell me she wanted a divorce on her timeline after she'd had her romantic getaway with her lover. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of controlling this narrative, of being the one who ended our marriage. No, I was going to take that power back. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney for the day after Sarah left for Miami. I'd already given him copies of all the evidence, but we needed to finalize the divorce petition and prepare the rest of the documentation. I also made an appointment with an investigator who could serve her the papers, because I wanted it to happen while she was in Miami with Marcus. I wanted her to receive those divorce papers in the middle of her romantic getaway, wanted Marcus to see exactly what kind of woman he was getting involved with, wanted the reality of consequences to crash into her fantasy world at the worst possible moment. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it cruel? Perhaps. But after 18 months of lies and betrayal, after being made a fool of in my own marriage, I felt entitled to a little strategic timing of my own. The morning Sarah left for Miami, she was excited in a way I hadn't seen in months. She was practically glowing, chattering about the trip, making sure she had everything packed. She kissed me goodbye with what almost seemed like genuine affection, told me she'd miss me, promised to call every night. I hugged her, told her to have a safe flight, said I'd be here when she got back. All lies, but then our entire marriage had become built on lies, so what was a few more? I watched her drive away, watched until her car disappeared around the corner, and then I went inside and started the final preparations. I had already packed up my most important belongings, things with sentimental value or that I didn't want to risk losing in the divorce proceedings. I'd moved them to a storage unit Sarah didn't know about. I'd changed my direct deposit to go to a new bank account she had no access to. I'd done everything my attorney had advised to protect myself. Now all that was left was to file the papers and serve them. My attorney filed the divorce petition that afternoon, Irreconcilable differences and adultery were listed as the grounds. The evidence I'd gathered was attached as exhibits, hundreds of pages of documentation proving beyond any doubt that Sarah had been unfaithful. My attorney said it was one of the most thoroughly documented cases of infidelity he'd ever seen. He actually seemed impressed by the level of detail I'd managed to compile. I felt a grim satisfaction at that. At least I'd been good at something in all this mess. The next morning, while Sarah was presumably enjoying breakfast with Marcus at some beachfront restaurant in Miami, a process server knocked on the door of her hotel room. I'd hired an investigator to find out exactly where she was staying. Turns out Marcus had booked them a suite at one of the most expensive hotels on South Beach. The investigator confirmed that they were registered as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, using Marcus's last name, playing house like they were a real married couple instead of two adulterers on an illicit vacation. The process server handed Sarah the divorce papers right there in the hotel hallway, with Marcus standing next to her. I wasn't there to see it, obviously, but the investigator I'd hired took photographs of the moment. The look on Sarah's face when she opened that envelope and saw what was inside, shock, horror, disbelief, fear, all of it captured in high-resolution images that I'll probably never look at again but that I needed to have. Proof that she'd felt something, even if it was just surprise at getting caught and served, rather than remorse for what she'd done. She called me within 20 minutes, her voice shaking and high-pitched in a way I'd never heard before. She was crying, asking what was happening, saying there must be some mistake, begging me to explain what these papers meant. I stayed calm. I'd prepared for this conversation, rehearsed what I was going to say, though hearing her actual voice made it harder than I'd anticipated. I told her there was no mistake. I told her I knew everything about her and Marcus, that I'd known for months, that I had documented evidence of every lie she'd told and every time she'd betrayed our marriage vows. I told her that I'd filed for divorce, and that she should have her lawyers contact mine to discuss the terms. She started sobbing then, really crying, saying it wasn't what I thought, that she could explain, that we needed to talk about this face to face. I almost laughed. After 18 months of deception, she wanted to talk. After building an entire secret life with another man, she wanted to explain. The audacity of it was almost impressive. I told her we could talk through our lawyers from now on, that I had nothing more to say to her, that our marriage was over and had been over for a long time. I just hadn't known it. She begged me not to do this, said she loved me, that she'd made a mistake but we could work through it. I asked her how many times a mistake has to be repeated before it stops being a mistake and becomes a choice. I asked her how many lies you can tell before love becomes meaningless. She didn't have answers to those questions. Or if she did, she didn't share them with me. I told her I'd be moved out of the house by the time she returned from Miami, that she could have the house if she wanted it, but she'd have to buy out my share according to the appraised value. I told her that my attorney would be in touch with details about dividing our assets, and that given the evidence of her infidelity, she should prepare for the process to be fairly straightforward in my favor. Then I told her goodbye, and I hung up. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. She called 17 more times that day, left voicemails that progressed from tearful apologies to angry accusations to desperate pleas. I listened to exactly none of them. I'd heard enough of her voice in the recordings I'd made. I didn't need to hear any more lies, any more manipulations, any more attempts to rewrite history or minimize what she'd done. I spent the next 3 days moving my things out of the house and into a furnished apartment I'd rented across town. It was strange, dismantling 8 years of shared life, deciding what was mine and what was ours, and what I was willing to walk away from. I took my clothes, my computer, my books, some furniture I'd brought into the marriage. I left her the wedding photos, couldn't bear to take them or look at them or remember what I'd felt on that day when I thought I was marrying someone who would keep her promises. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note that just said, "You broke these vows, not me." I felt like a ghost walking through that house, seeing all the spaces where our life used to be, where we used to exist together, the couch where we'd watched movies, the table where we'd eaten dinner, the bed where we'd made love and made plans and made promises we both thought would last forever. Each room was haunted with memories of who we used to be, or who I thought we were, and then I locked the door behind me for the last time and drove to my new apartment, my new life, the future I'd have to build alone. Sarah came back from Miami 2 days early, cutting short her trip with Marcus to try to salvage the wreckage of our marriage. She showed up at the house to find it half empty, my presence erased from every room. She called me from our bedroom, her bedroom now, I suppose, crying so hard she could barely speak. She said seeing the house like this, seeing me gone, made it real in a way that the papers hadn't. She said she'd ruined everything, that she was so sorry, that if I'd just give her a chance, she'd end things with Marcus, and we could go to counseling and rebuild what we'd had. I told her what we'd had was based on a lie, that I couldn't rebuild something that had never actually existed. She insisted that she'd loved me, that she still loved me, that the affair was a mistake she'd been too weak to end, but that didn't mean our marriage was meaningless. I asked her how I was supposed to believe anything she said when she'd been lying to me for a year and a half. I asked her how I was supposed to trust her again when she'd proven so thoroughly that she was capable of looking me in the eye and deceiving me without hesitation. She didn't have good answers. She just kept crying and apologizing and begging for another chance. Part of me, a small pathetic part that I'm not proud of, wanted to give in, wanted to believe that people could change, that she really was sorry, that maybe we could find a way through this. But the rest of me, the part that had listened to those recordings of her with Marcus, the part that had documented her lies and her betrayal and her complete lack of respect for our marriage, that part knew better. This wasn't salvageable. Trust, once broken this completely, can't be repaired. It can be rebuilt from scratch maybe with someone new, in a new relationship, but not here, not with her, not after this. I told her I'd been served divorce papers and we should both move forward with lawyers handling the details. She said she wouldn't sign them, that she'd fight the divorce, that she wouldn't just let our marriage end without trying to save it. I told her she should have thought about saving our marriage before she started sleeping with someone else, before she lied to me 1,000 times, before she planned a future with another man while pretending to still be building one with me. I told her that fighting the divorce would only make things more expensive and painful for both of us, that the evidence I had made the outcome inevitable, regardless of whether she cooperated or not. She asked what evidence I was talking about, her voice getting smaller, more afraid, and that's when I told her. I told her about the recordings, the surveillance, the photographs, the recovered text messages, the credit card statements, the timeline I'd created. I told her I had documentation of virtually every interaction she'd had with Marcus over the past 3 months, along with enough evidence from before that to establish a clear pattern of ongoing infidelity. I told her I knew about the apartment visits, the business trips that weren't business trips, the lies she told me about working late or meeting colleagues. I knew all of it, had proof of all of it, and if she forced me to go to court, all of that evidence would become part of the public record in our divorce proceedings. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, angrier, defensive instead of apologetic. She accused me of violating her privacy, of being controlling and paranoid, of probably breaking laws with all my surveillance and recording. She said I was sick for stalking her and documenting her life like some kind of psychopath. I almost admired the deflection, the way she tried to make herself the victim in this scenario. But it didn't work. I calmly explained that I'd checked all the relevant laws before I started, that every recording I'd made was legal, that monitoring equipment in my own home and recording conversations I was party to were both well within my rights. I told her she could try to play the victim all she wanted, but the facts were simple. She'd committed adultery repeatedly over 18 months. I'd documented it, and now we were getting divorced with terms that reflected her fault in destroying our marriage. She changed tactics again, switched back to begging, saying we'd been together for 9 years and didn't that mean anything? Didn't I have any love left for her at all? The truth was that I did still love her, or at least I loved who I'd thought she was. You can't just turn off 8 years of feelings because someone betrays you. The heart doesn't work that way. But loving someone doesn't mean you have to stay with them when they've proven they don't respect you, don't value you, don't prioritize your marriage. Love isn't enough when trust is gone, when the foundation of your relationship is revealed to have been built on sand instead of stone. I told her that I'd probably always care about her on some level, but that I couldn't be married to someone I couldn't trust, someone who'd shown me so clearly that I wasn't enough for her, that our life together wasn't enough to keep her faithful. She said Marcus was a mistake, that he didn't mean anything, that she'd end it immediately if I'd just give her another chance. But I'd heard her with him, heard the way she talked about him, about their future together. He wasn't a mistake to her. He was what she'd chosen, what she'd wanted badly enough to risk everything for. I was the mistake, or at least staying with me was. She'd just been too comfortable or too cowardly to leave cleanly instead of hedging her bets by keeping both of us in her life. The conversation ended with her still crying, still pleading, and me feeling utterly exhausted. I told her one more time to have her lawyer contact mine, and then I hung up. She tried calling back several more times, but I blocked her number. There was nothing left to say. The divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising speed. Sarah initially said she'd fight it, but her attorney apparently explained reality to her. With the evidence I had, fighting would only result in less favorable terms for her and much higher legal bills for both of us. She eventually agreed to negotiate a settlement. I got a larger share of our assets due to her fault in ending the marriage. She kept the house but had to refinance to buy out my equity. We split the retirement accounts and other investments according to a formula that favored me. There was no alimony because we'd both been working throughout the marriage, and her infidelity eliminated any claim she might have had to my support. The whole process took about 4 months from filing to finalization. 4 months of lawyers and paperwork and negotiations over who got which furniture, and whether the wedding gifts from her family should go back to her. 4 months of grief and anger, and slowly, painfully beginning to rebuild a sense of self that wasn't defined by being someone's husband. 4 months of therapy, of learning to trust again, or at least learning that maybe someday I could trust again, of processing the trauma of betrayal and deception and having your reality completely upended. I heard through mutual friends that Sarah and Marcus broke up about a month after I filed for divorce. Apparently, the reality of actually being together, without the excitement of sneaking around and the forbidden nature of their relationship, wasn't quite as thrilling as they'd imagined. Or maybe Marcus realized that someone who would cheat on their spouse so extensively might not be the most trustworthy partner for him either. I felt a grim satisfaction at that news, though I'd be lying if I said it made me feel completely better. Their breakup didn't undo what they'd done. It didn't return the 1.5 years of my life that I'd spent being deceived. It didn't restore the trust I'd lost or heal the wounds that betrayal had opened up. Some mutual friends tried to maintain relationships with both of us, but most ended up having to choose sides. Most chose mine, once they learned the full story of what had happened. Sarah apparently tried to control the narrative at first, telling people that we'd just grown apart or that I'd been distant and neglectful. But word got out about the affair, about the evidence I'd gathered, about how thoroughly and deliberately she'd lied to everyone, not just me. Her reputation suffered. She lost some friends. She had to live with the consequences of her choices in ways that probably made her uncomfortable. I can't say I took pleasure in that exactly, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. Actions have consequences. Betrayal has costs. She was learning that the hard way. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, which seemed fitting since my old life had ended on a Tuesday too. I signed the final papers in my attorney's office, and just like that, 8 years of marriage were legally dissolved. I wasn't Sarah's husband anymore. She wasn't my wife. We were just two people who used to know each other, who used to love each other, who'd once promised forever and ended up with just a few years and a lot of pain. My attorney congratulated me, said I'd handled everything well, that I should feel proud of how I'd protected myself and managed a difficult situation with intelligence and restraint. I thanked him, shook his hand, walked out of his office, and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, just feeling empty. Not happy, not sad, just hollow. Like I'd been running on adrenaline and anger and determination for so long that now that it was over, I didn't know what to feel or who to be. I drove to a park near my new apartment and sat on a bench watching people go about their lives. Couples walking dogs, parents pushing strollers, joggers and cyclists, and people on their phones having conversations that probably felt monumentally important to them. Normal life, continuing on like it always does, indifferent to individual heartbreak and betrayal. The world doesn't stop turning because your marriage ends. People don't stop falling in love because you've learned that love can be a weapon used against you. Life just keeps going whether you're ready for it or not. I thought about Sarah and wondered if she was sitting somewhere having similar thoughts, if she felt empty too, or if she felt relieved, free, unburdened by the marriage she'd clearly found constraining enough to betray. I wondered if she regretted her choices or if she was already making plans for her next relationship, her next chance at happiness. I wondered if she ever really understood what she'd done to me, how completely she'd shattered my ability to trust, how many therapy sessions it would take before I could even consider opening my heart to someone new. But mostly, I thought about myself and the future I now had to build alone. I thought about who I wanted to be, what I wanted from life, how I was going to move forward from this. Because that's what you do, right? You survive the betrayal, you process the pain, you learn the lessons, and then you move forward. You don't stay stuck in the anger and hurt forever, even though some days it feels like you will. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized now. 6 months of slowly, painfully learning to be just me instead of half of a we. 6 months of building a new life, making new routines, figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by being someone's husband. It hasn't been easy. There are still days when I wake up and my first thought is to reach for Sarah, to share some thought or observation with her before I remember that she's not there, that she doesn't get to be part of my thoughts anymore. There are still moments when something happens and I think I should tell her about this, before remembering all the reasons why I can't and shouldn't. But those moments are becoming less frequent. The grief is becoming less sharp. The anger is fading into something more like acceptance. I've started dating again, though it's terrifying in ways it never was before Sarah. Every woman I meet, I find myself watching for signs of deception, for red flags, for any indication that history might repeat itself. My therapist says this is normal, that learning to trust again after such a thorough betrayal takes time and patience. She says I'm doing well, making progress, healing in healthy ways. I'm not sure I believe her, but I'm trying. I've reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage, built new friendships, found hobbies and interests that are just mine. I've thrown myself into my work and actually gotten a promotion that I probably wouldn't have pursued if I'd still been focused on maintaining a failing marriage. I've traveled to places Sarah and I never went, had experiences she's not part of, created memories that belong only to me. I'm building a life that doesn't have room for her ghost, though I'm not sure I'll ever completely exorcise it. Some betrayals are too deep to ever fully heal from. You just learn to live with the scar tissue, to build yourself around the damaged parts, to keep going even though you're not quite whole anymore. I don't know what happened to Sarah after the divorce. I blocked her on all social media, asked mutual friends not to talk to me about her, made a clean break as much as possible. I heard she moved to a different city, started over somewhere fresh where people didn't know about the affair or the divorce or the husband she'd betrayed. Maybe she's happy now. Maybe she found what she was looking for when she decided our marriage wasn't enough for her. Maybe she's with someone new, being faithful this time, having learned from her mistakes. Or maybe she's repeating the same patterns because that's what people do when they don't really confront their issues. When they just move from relationship to relationship, hoping the next one will be different, without doing the internal work to become different themselves. I don't know, and I've stopped caring. That chapter of my life is over. Looking back now, I have mixed feelings about the surveillance, the recording, the way I gathered evidence before confronting her. Part of me is proud that I was strategic, that I protected myself, that I documented everything and left her no room to lie or manipulate the narrative. But part of me wonders if it was healthy, if all that time spent living a double life while I accumulated evidence damaged me in ways I still haven't fully processed. There's something fundamentally trust-destroying about surveilling your own spouse, about turning your home into a space where you're constantly monitoring and recording. It changed me, made me more suspicious, more guarded, more cynical about love and relationships. I'm not sure I'd recommend that path to others, even though it served my purposes at the time. Maybe it would have been better to confront her the moment I suspected, to end things quickly rather than extending the agony for months while I built my case. Or maybe not. Maybe I needed that evidence, not just for the divorce proceedings, but for my own peace of mind, to know that I wasn't crazy or paranoid, that my instincts were correct, that what I was feeling was based on reality, not insecurity. Maybe I needed the proof to be able to move forward without second-guessing myself or wondering if I'd given up too easily on something that could have been saved. The truth is, there's no perfect way to handle betrayal. You do what you need to do to survive it, to protect yourself, to come out the other side with at least some of your dignity intact. For me, that meant gathering evidence, filing for divorce, taking control of a situation where I'd been made powerless by someone else's lies. For someone else, it might mean confronting immediately, or trying counseling, or any number of other approaches. There's no right answer, just whatever gets you through it with the least amount of damage to your soul. What I know for sure is this: I deserved better than what Sarah gave me. I deserved honesty, fidelity, A partner who chose me every day instead of only when it was convenient or comfortable. I deserved someone who valued our marriage enough to protect it, to communicate when things felt wrong, to end things honestly if she was no longer happy rather than maintaining a facade while building a secret life. And I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I survived something I thought would destroy me. I rebuilt a life from the wreckage of my marriage. I learned to trust myself again even when I can't fully trust others yet. I discovered that I could be alone without being lonely, that I could be my own source of stability and comfort instead of relying on someone else to provide those things. These are hard-won lessons, bought with pain and tears and countless sleepless nights. But they're mine, and they've made me someone different. Someone maybe better in some ways, even though I wouldn't have chosen this path if I'd had any other option. So if you're going through something similar, if you suspect that the person you love is betraying you, if you're lying awake at night feeling that sick certainty that something is wrong even though you can't prove it yet, here's what I want you to know. Trust your instincts. That feeling in your gut, that sense that something isn't right, it's usually correct. Don't let anyone convince you that you're paranoid or insecure or imagining things. Pay attention to the signs. Document what you need to document. Protect yourself financially and emotionally. And when you're ready, when you have the evidence and the plan and the support system in place, take action. Don't let fear of being alone or hope that things will magically improve keep you trapped in a relationship built on lies. You deserve honesty. You deserve fidelity. You deserve someone who chooses you completely and proudly, not someone who keeps you as their backup plan while they explore other options. Have you been through something similar? Have you had to make the painful decision to end a relationship you thought would last forever? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in these experiences can make them a little easier to bear. Sometimes sharing our pain with others who understand can be the first step toward healing. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart or made you think about your own relationships, please leave a like. It helps get this story out to others who might need to hear it, who might be going through similar situations and feeling lost and alone. Subscribe to Living Through It for more stories like this one. Real experiences from real people navigating the complicated, messy, beautiful, painful reality of human relationships. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Because we're all living through something, aren't we? We're all carrying our own stories of heartbreak and healing, of betrayal and survival, of endings and new beginnings. And maybe by sharing these stories, by being honest about our pain and our resilience, we can help each other feel a little less alone in whatever we're living through. Thank you for watching, for listening, for being part of this community. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember, you're stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and worthy of so much more than someone who can't see your value.